Test. Yeah. Welcome back for the break you were not allowed to have. I'm sorry, I made a mistake when I made the program, but I was thinking you were tough, so 4 hours, no problem. But I have to reconsider for next year. We are ready and very proud to present the next speaker, also from Denmark, which will be a follow-up on the visit we had last year from Judith Very Baker, where she focused on Lee Harvey Oswald and his role in this. This time we are going to focus on the assassination of JFK in Dallas. And Jens Mohr Thygesen have used some special photographic equipment to analyze the photos around that. And it's going to be very exciting. So please give a warm welcome to Jens Mohr Thygesen.
Maybe now? Now it's on, yes. Welcome in the audience and welcome on the net. I would like to tell you a little about what I've been researching for the last 53 years. I've been doing other things as well, but this has always been a passion. And it's very, I think, symbolic that we are standing in a building which we heard yesterday contained garbage. But may I remind you that it's a dunghill that produces the most beautiful roses. So we'll go on and hear about the JFK assassination.
The sprocket holes could only be seen on slide.
Yeah, oh, we can take off the sound because if you can take off the sound, just to tell you where we are in Dallas in '63, 22nd of November. And JFK is on tour there for raising political votes for the '64 election. He's coming around the corner in the motorcade here, and this is here where everything is going to take place. And we just have to orientate ourselves physically where we are. The president's coming here. It's coming in slow motion later. He's shot there the first time, and the limousine almost stops, and he's shot in the head the second time there, and he's dead. Before he reaches the underpass, Jackie Kennedy is collecting some of his brain, thrown onto the trunk, showing that he was shot from in front. We'll see it in slow motion again. You cannot comprehend everything in these seconds, but we'll come back to it, just that you know this is a film taken by Abraham Zapruder that was cut in the film, so we cannot guarantee it's pristine, and people have some kind of notion that things have been changed. For example, this Stemmons Freeway sign has been put in later and something like that. But I would like you to take notice of this man in the apron standing there. We'll come back to him later. And Kennedy's already shot in the throat. And the limousine stops. Connolly sitting in front of him is shot too. And everything's over within 9 seconds. So it was just to give you the graphic image of that terrible thing that happened. So why do we bother to look at something that's 50 years old? Does it really matter? Well, it's interesting, yes, but it is only academic interest? No, it's definitely not. If we go to JFK was much more than a president. He was a statesman, and he had the guts to stand up to administrations around him, the FBI, the CIA, and other military organizations, because he was a visionary too. He had so many insights, among other things, the truth, and that is what we are trying to find out today, because it's important to find the truth about this thing. And I'll tell you why, because if the Kennedys had proceeded, JFK had prolonged for another 4 years, he would probably have been succeeded by Robert Kennedy for another 8 years, and maybe after that, Edward Kennedy for another 8 years. That means they would have gone on in the dynasty for the 80s. And their policies were different. It was Alliance for Progress, which would try to eliminate illness and ignorance, Peace Corps were young Americans going into the South American states, living on their terms and trying to explain what the benefits of a free world was about, free speech. They were trying to conquer souls, not square meters. They were going into disarmament. They would end war and Cold War, and they wanted to make a mutual exploration of space with the Soviets. So it was a very peaceful way of living. Instead, on this turn, the 22nd of November '63, we got something else. We got these people. We got the Vietnam War. We got escalation of Cold War. We got Watergate, the scandal, which is which is a direct consequence of the JFK assassination. We'll talk about that later. We went on having CIA destabilize foreign democratically elected governments. We got the oil wars, and we got war on terror, as we heard before. So this was a complete change of policy at that time. So it certainly matters what happened that day, especially when we found out what happened. So let me just tell you some basic facts, which is the background of all this. And probably you never heard all of these things, so they're rather amazing. But after you've heard these, I'm sure you can put together the consequences of what this means. Fidel Castro, sitting on Cuba, took over after Batista in a coup, which was supported by the CIA and the mafia, and guns were run to him by Jack Ruby. So he had close connections to Cuba. He even managed to get the mafia leader Santos Trafficante released from jail in 60, I think, or 59, with the help of Rolando Cubela. But Jack Ruby, who killed Oswald, as you may remember, had actually a very big position in Cuba. Remember that. But Castro, he stood with his back against the wall, because after the missile crisis in '62, the Russians agreed with Kennedy. Khrushchev and Kennedy agreed to remove the missiles without asking Castro. He had to learn it from the radio. He was furious. He was a loose missile himself. And there was a rumor that not all missiles had been taken away, so it was very important for the Kennedy administration to settle the Cuban thing before the '64 election. It was rumored there were still missiles there, he would lose the election. But Castro was standing with his back against the wall, and Kennedy had promised not to invade Cuba, but he hadn't promised not to kill Castro, and he was doing that several times. We know from Alexander Haig that the Kennedy family, Robert and JFK, were personally standing behind assassination attempts on Castro 8 different times. That was the way things were conducted. And of course, one can see it from the American point of view, because Castro was destabilizing world peace. He was threatening 50 million American lives by having these missiles there. So what do Castro do? He had to use some very extraordinary means to solve his solution, because he was afraid an American invasion would occur, and he was afraid of being assassinated. There was many attempts. So he warned the American leaders in an improvised press conference on the 4th of October, 7th of October, '63 in Havana, that if the American leaders were trying to eliminate Cuban leaders, they could very well be exposed to something like it themselves. Clear warning. And he was actually preparing it, and to this day, Castro's secret service, the D2, believes that they were behind the JFK assassination. But of course, Castro was not that stupid that he would actually kill Kennedy, because that would mean the end of his reign. But what he did probably was that he organized a provocation of Kennedy. So we'll come back to that. On that day, Che Guevara was placed under house arrest, because he was accused of being part of a plot to overthrow Castro. 22nd. So something was going on there. Later he was exiled and killed by the CIA. Castro had agents in Dallas that day. Miguel Casas, he was present. We know that from CIA documents. He was present in Dallas. And he was an agent, he was a terrorist. Why wasn't he arrested? Because CIA, they wanted him to play out his role, a part of it. On the morning of the assassination, Castro told his listening compound, you only have to listen for Texas Today. So he knew there was something going on there, and he was a part of it maybe. And when he was planning an interview with a French journalist, Jean Daniels, and when he heard the news that Kennedy had been killed, he was really frightened. So of course he hadn't planned that. He said, "Es una mala noticia." It's a very bad news. He said it 3 times and was really shocked. And within the hour, he told Daniels that they would put it on his doorstep. He knew he was going to be accused of it. Why did he know that? Because of course he had some kind of a hand in it. We'll come back to that. Castro had prepared a provocation that there should be shots fired at Kennedy in Dallas that day, and that Lee Harvey Oswald, come back to that, Russian agent, would take the political blame for it. Afterwards, they would make the press conference and say that they could have killed Kennedy, but they didn't. Kennedy has tried to kill Castro so many times. Now I put my hand forward to Kennedy. Let's live in peace. That was Castro's idea. Even more interesting is Robert Kennedy. You probably don't know this, but Robert Kennedy kept tabs on Oswald, returning from Russia from '62. He knew who Oswald was. They were going to use him. He contemplated a false flag operation during the missile crisis in '62. He knew what a false flag operation was. You know, you do something and you blame the enemy for doing it, which makes you right to retaliate in a certain fashion. So Kennedy was not foreign to that kind of thing. And even before Oswald had been identified by the Dallas police, he was phoned by Hoover and said it was a knot. It was within hours of the assassination. Hoover phoned Robert Kennedy and said it was a knot who returned from Russia. His name was Lee Harvey Oswald, and he acted alone. And afterwards, Kennedy phones one of his men who is planning the invasion of Cuba 1 week later and says, one of your guys did it. How did he know that? He knew who Oswald was. He knew that it was a part of the plan, the false flag operation that Kennedy was into, and that's why he knew who he was, and that was why he was paralyzed by that knowledge. Come back to it. This guy, Harry Williams, was one of the guys who were planning out of Robert Kennedy's own office, not out of the CIA, because they didn't trust the CIA, planning the invasion of Cuba on the 1st of December. Privately, he told, and that's very important because officially, Robert Kennedy acknowledged the Warren Commission. It was true what they said, but privately, within days after the assassination, he sent a secret telegram to Khrushchev saying that it was, in his opinion, a domestic, high-level conspiracy behind Oswald's rifle, and that Dallas was the ideal place for it. We come back to why it was ideal. And privately told that conspiracy had arisen out of the government's own anti-Castro project. He told his son in '67 that the truth about the assassination would never be known. Well, you only say that if you are part of the secrecy yourself. And the son felt that Robert Kennedy knew more about it than he would tell. At the time, just after the assassination, they tried to find out Oswald's connections to Mexico City, and Robert Kennedy put his foot down. And there was we know that from one of the FBI agents. He said there was an uprising to murder, to mutiny in the FBI and the CIA because they had to close down the investigation. But as he said, as even the brother of the president wanted it shut down, they shut it down. And now in '67, when Garrison went into this trial and he wanted to find out what really happened just 4 years before, he found out that Robert Kennedy was one of those who actually opposed the investigation. He couldn't understand why this fellow did not want his own brother's murder to be investigated. It's a fact. And then he took possession of some of the things in the metal tray, the brain and so forth, and buried it all at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. And that was wrong one. And when he was asked by the Warren Commission to appear and give testimony, because he would really be incensed that they had killed his beloved brother, he just writes the Attorney General at the time, Nicholas Katzenberg, what do I do? Well, isn't it simple just to tell the Commission what you know and try to find out? He didn't want to do that. He just signed a document that said that he didn't know of any kind of conspiracy. And Katzenberg later told a friend, my feeling was that Bobby was worried that there might be some kind of conspiracy and that it might be his fault. It might very well have been that he was worried that the investigation would somehow point back to him. Well, am I telling you that he killed his own brother? No, he didn't. He didn't want that. He loved him. But he made some things that boomeranged and turned out to be the killing of JFK. In '68, he remarks that they had. He wondered if they hadn't paid too high a price for being more energetic than wise, or a lot of things, especially Cuba. But at the time of the assassination, just weeks after, he sends a memo to get the new president, Johnson, to be behind an invasion of Cuba. So it tells you that he was actually very interested at the time to invade Cuba. What about JFK? Well, we don't know very much about their policy, because the first thing that Bobby Kennedy did when JFK was killed was that he phoned the White House and had the Oval Office sealed and all documents sealed so Johnson wouldn't have access to them. And then he later told Allen Dulles, the chief of the CIA, former chief of CIA, that their policies had never been written down. So we don't know what really. So we all only have these suggestions of what was happening. On the day of the assassination, he took off his medal he was always wearing, St. Christopher and St. Jude medal, and left them behind. He mimicked a pistol shooter and said, last night would have been a hell of a night to assassinate your president. And later, if somebody wants to shoot me with a high-powered rifle from an office building, I can do nothing about it. Those are the two kind of weapons that Oswald had, if you remember the photos that were published of him. So he almost predicted it. And Jackie Kennedy, who may have known something about it, said, we're just sitting ducks in a shooting gallery when they went through Dallas. In his morning speech, he said 3 times the last 2 years we've been in conflict with communism, and it can happen anytime again. And that he was preparing for an invasion, we knew from the Orange Bowl Stadium speech, where he promised to bring this flag back in a free Havana. He was not going to let Castro sit there. And then he goes into a fight about the seating in the motorcade that morning, because Yarborough was sitting with Johnson. Johnson said wouldn't go with him, and went to Kennedy to change seats, and he said, no. Yarborough sits with you, and if he doesn't do that, he can walk. And that made the consequence that Connolly was sitting just in front of Kennedy. And then there's the whole thing of the security in Dallas, which was completely stripped of security. The bubble top was off, and it was all Kennedy, the president's idea. Everybody said, put up the bubble top and so forth. There had been a lot of rumors about assassination attempts, but Kennedy didn't want it, and he removed the security around. He said he wanted the crowd to see Jackie, but he himself removed the security. And when advanceman Martin Underwood tells the president there's been all these kind of rumors and everybody knew that something was going to happen there, Kennedy just says, you worry too much. So he had, it's obvious to me, a secret plan. And then we have the bullfighter verse, I'll show you later, which is one of the best clues. It is a verse that the first time he proclaimed it publicly, when he learned about the missiles being present in Cuba, he publicly recited it. And this morning it was in the CIA memos he was reading on his way to Dallas. And it includes a little passage, "Only one knows in the plaza." J. Edgar Hoover, you may know, was a very powerful man. John F. Kennedy once mentioned him by saying, "You don't argue with God." So he was very powerful. And he was powerful because he had these extensive files. He didn't just record people's doing, which might be okay, but he bugged their bedrooms and so forth. He knew all about their weaknesses and so forth, and he used them in subtle blackmail. He was Johnson's very good friend and his neighbor. He had to have a presidential dispensation for continuing as a chief for the FBI, and he wouldn't get it with the Kennedys. He had close connection to American oil and was enjoying their golden privileges. And he conducted his subtle blackmail to politicians and was one of the most powerful men in the States. But what you may not know was that he himself was blackmailed by mafia because he had some weaknesses himself. He was a homosexual. He was living with the second man in FBI, Mr. Tolson. And he was obviously a transvestite, and he was a ludomanic too. And the mafia had the pictures of that. So he was under pressure from the mafia. And I think it was Meyer Lansky who had those pictures. And if they would have been published, they would have lost their pressure value, so you have never seen them, that's why. And though there have been some on the net, to demonstrate that it's true. He was so clever that he was able to predict that Oswald was a lone assassin within 2 hours of the assassination, at a time where the Dallas police hadn't even identified who he was, because he had several IDs on him. Hoover called Bobby Kennedy and told him that he was behind it. And he also told, we come to that later, but he made a declaration on the next day, before any witnesses had been heard or any evidence has been investigated, that Oswald was a lone assassin with no Confederates still at large. And he writes, "The public must be satisfied." It doesn't say that he was, but the public must be satisfied that Oswald was a lone assassin with no Confederates still at large, before any evidence has been shown. And it was exactly the same evidence that the Warren Commission conclusion they came to 7 months later. Then he told that Johnson that Oswald, the rifle that Oswald allegedly used, the Mannlicher Carcano, was found on the 5th floor. And we have from other sources that it might be on the 4th floor, but not on the 6th floor. So we see there's something that's not quite right there. And then he suppressed Oswald's connection to the FBI. Oswald had a number in the FBI and was receiving money, $200 a month, as an informant for the FBI, but he closed that down. When they found that out in the Warren Commission, they immediately closed the book and said, we might as well go home, because they did not dare to stand up to Hoover. And that's where the whole investigation stopped. And at that meeting, Alan Dulles said, I would like to see this memo destroyed. It wasn't, so we know now, but that was what really stopped it. And then yet, though he seemed very confirmed who it was, he told Johnson within a few days that the case against Oswald was not very, very strong. It meant that they didn't have anything. So I have to tell you, they actually fabricated a lot of the evidence that to us proved that Oswald allegedly did it. And then he got his reward in '64 as Johnson promoted him as director for life for the FBI. Johnson had a problem in those days. He was going to be indicted for the Bobby Baker scandal, including corruption, murder, and you name it. And he was already politically dead at the time he went to Dallas. They say he could choose between prison or presidency, and you know what he chose. So We know that from his mistress. He had a mistress. He had a illegitimate son with her, Madeleine Brown. She stepped forward in 96 and told us that the evening before the assassination, there was a party at Clint Murchison's house, a rich oil magnate in Texas. And at that party, J. Edgar Hoover came, Nixon came, and Johnson. And they went into a meeting with Clint Murchison, and for just a quarter of an hour, and Johnson came out, went over to her, took her by her arms and said, after tomorrow, those damn Kennedys won't make a fool out of me anymore. That's not a threat, that's a promise. And she didn't know what it meant. He repeated the next morning, and after the assassination had took place the next morning, she knew that he had premonition of what was going to happen. She confronted it with him the next time they were together in New Year's Eve, 63, 64. And he was very furious, as he usually was, but fell down. And at the end, he confessed to her that it was the CIA and American Oil who was behind it. Then comes Ruby. It's much more interesting than you may think, because he's always been told he was a kind of a nut who had this nightclub, and it was a spontaneous reaction that he shot Oswald. But as he was an FBI informant from 1967 for Richard Nixon. He was running guns for Castro, as I mentioned. He secured this top mafia leader, Santos Traficante, from Castro's prison, and he has close connection to the mafia too. He was seen on the 11th of March 63 in the spring, and that's the day after Oswald's alleged Walker shooting. I don't know if you remember that. He took a shot, allegedly, at a General Walker, who wasn't hurt or anything, but he took the political responsibility for it. That's true, but it was a provocation, and probably they were going to use it for Castro to show that he was able to do it, and this Oswald may not have been the Oswald that we know. But what is important, he was heard with Ruby discussing the killing of Senator Connally, the guy sitting just in front of Kennedy, by an attorney in Dallas who told the FBI about it later. Ruby and Oswald were discussing, one Oswald was discussing the murder of Connally. And he was seen with Oswald, one Oswald, in the early morning of the day of the assassination. But we know the real Oswald, the Oswald we know, he was fast asleep at Marina's house at that time. So this was another one. We know there are several Oswalds. I'll come back to that. And he knew Zapruder, this guy taking the film we saw in the beginning, personally. And Zapruder, who knew Oswald, could have a lot of information for Oswald, and maybe even was asked to go down there and film it by Ruby. He knew Ruby, was claiming all the time that Senator Connally was the prime target. This guy filming up there, how would he know anything about that? He knew Ruby, he may have heard it from him, and the interesting thing is that when he took this picture, which is very stable, he's able to take this picture very stable, although the horrific sounds and shooting was around him, these bullets were flying around him, he took the shot, and when he took it down, he said 3 times, "They killed him. They killed him." He didn't say they shot him, they killed him. Something else than killing should have taken place. That is what we think, and all the time he was thinking, he said that to his death, that Senator Connally was the prime target of this attempt, and that the same thing Senator Connally said to his death. He was a prime target, and so did Marina Oswald. Not that Oswald did any of the shooting, but that was the whole thing of that day, was that Connally was to be hit, probably. Because when Ruby, in the morning, he was very satisfied with himself. He was not making any kind of secrecy out of delivering a person, Oswald lookalike, at this Texas School Book Depository, was witnessed by Mercer. He was advising friends to come down and watch the fireworks in Dealey Plaza. It's the killing of the president. And if you know what happened to Ruby later, he wouldn't have been so happy about it. Obviously something else happened than he thought. Why don't you come down and watch the fireworks today? Frank Sturgis, it was one of the Watergate burglars and also active in this part, claimed that Ruby was part of G2 in Cuba, the Secret Service, and we know who was in the FBI too. He was playing both roles. And as I said before, maybe Zapruder was urged to go down and watch the fireworks too with his camera. Because he got down there very early on, an hour before, to get a good place to take these shots at the motorcade. He was around Dealey Plaza at the time of the assassination. It has been denied by the Warren Commission, but we have actually pictures showing it. Willie's picture shows it. And we have witnesses telling that he was, immediately after the shooting, he runs from the school book depository to the grassy knoll because he heard some shots were fired there, and Gene Hill sees him run that way. He was interviewing witnesses and sending them to the police beneath the school book depository at just after the shooting. So he had a very active role. He was in Parkland Hospital when Kennedy was declared dead, said cancer journalist, so he was there. And he was actually in the movie theater where Oswald was arrested. One of the patrons there described it, and the Warren Commission said none of it were true. They were all mistaken, it was not Ruby. But he was playing an essential role there. And when he went, when Oswald, the first Oswald, the Russian Oswald, the one we know, went outside the Texas School Book Depository, he was handed a gun by Ruby. Witnesses saw that. It was a gun with a defect firing pin. We'll come back to that. But he was not going home to get this gun. He was handed it by Ruby. And when he hears that JFK has actually been killed, he turns white as a sheet. So he was genuinely surprised. And he was actually very close to Oswald several times. After the arrest of Oswald, he was in the police station. He could have gunned him down several times there, but he obviously first got the contract or the order to do it, and he tried to prevent it by calling in the Dallas police and said, "We are going to kill him," and they recognized his voice, and so that tells us that he was actually very reluctant to kill Oswald. He didn't want to do it, but he was told to do it. His life depended on it, probably. That was what the police themselves said, and that was why he reacted that way. And then we have this famous video clip where Oswald in prison says, because just after the killing of Oswald, he says he did it because he wanted to spare Jackie Kennedy the trial in Dallas, but later he said that the people behind him had such ulterior motives with this thing, and we will have a whole new government, and if they took him to Washington, he would tell the whole truth. And so he never managed that. He died in prison. Some doctors came from, that's the story, came from Chicago and injected him for flu. And he said himself that it was cancer cells, and he died of a peculiar cancer, so he might well have been right, but he died within years, and he tried to kill himself twice in there, and so forth. So it was really a sad ending for him. He gave an interview to a very famous columnist, Dorothy Kilgallen. And when she came out, she said, "I'm going to blow this story sky high." And then she committed suicide in the weekend. And even more strangely, she told her friend, and she committed suicide the day after. So, powerful things at stake here. So, now let's go to Oswald. We have to tell this story. It's an amazing story, but it's from the Cold War, and all the games that could be played are played there. Oswald, this picture of him is actually put together of the two Oswalds we know. The Oswald that went to Russia and the Oswald coming back, which were obviously not the same, and I'll tell you why. The real Oswald in '59 was a high-cleared CIA personnel at Atsugi Air Base in Japan. He was participating in conducting U-2 flights over Russia, and he knew a lot of secret things about the U-2 plane. Then he suddenly says, in the late 50s, he's defecting in '59, and says on the American embassy, which is bugged by the Russians in Moscow, that he wanted to give the Russians U-2 secrets. the Russians take him in, of course, and the Americans do nothing. And he's in there, the Russians find out he's a false defector, he's only interested in finding out how much they know about radar and so forth. But you have to then be very careful because now the man they sent back is a Russian lookalike. It's not Oswald coming back. He makes a lot of mistakes. One of the things, what I also found out in my book, is that if you see the identification cards of the Oswald going to Russia, his eyes are hazel. And when he comes back, they're gray. And we never see a colored photo of Oswald. A lot of other things he had, there was some scarring that didn't match. And actually, after the Oswald killing, 3 weeks later, the morticianer, Paul Grudy, was visited by some agents that didn't present themselves, and they say, Paul, did you remember this Oswald had this scar here, or did he? And he said, I don't remember, and they say, we don't know who we had in that grave. So obviously, it was some kind of intelligence scheme to put another Oswald back, and the Americans let him come back. In the CIA and in the FBI, allegedly. But of course, they must have known somewhere, and why did they let that play go on? Because they could use him in a false flag operation, maybe. He could be useful later. One of the Frank Sturgis, the Watergate burglars, said he had seen files on both of them, and he saw they were different. It's also his claim that it was another one coming back. And we come back to that because Oswald was actually exhumed in '81. We'll see about that. He was never charged because of his U-2 intelligence breach. Never. No, he just came in, just came back. He even was lended money by the government to come back. And then this lookalike comes in and he resumes his life in the States. A little peculiar. The Russians will have thought that they had put a mole in there successfully, and the Americans, some of them who knew about this, would just have waited to use him, maybe the Kennedy administration, in the right place. Because if you see, if a Russian lookalike is coming back and is charged of having killed the American president or anybody else, you really have the squeeze on the Soviets because they don't know if you know, and then they will be paralyzed. He was babysat by the Paynes, de Mohrenschildt, and Jack Ruby, and he was several times observed more than one place at a time. He was in Mexico City, and yet he participated in a meeting in Dallas. So there were obviously some kind of intelligence scheme going on with several Oswalds. Yes, we can go down to this. So the Cubans were recommended Oswald as a agent they could trust. Of course, it was their own. They didn't tell that. And he was taken in, and probably Castro believed too that he could be used as a kind of agent provocateur, a political activist. And that is how all this came up about the Walker incident, where there was shot at this general in April the 10th of '63. And probably also was going to be a part of that provocation that Castro prepared in Dallas, whether the shots should be fired at Kennedy, not to harm anybody, but to make to arouse international sympathy for Castro's government, and that Castro had been tried to eliminate it several times. Just before. On the 21st or 20th of November, I think it was, Oswald asked Marina, his wife, if she wanted to join him and hijack a plane for Cuba. He wanted to have her with him. She didn't want to. She wasn't involved in these plans. And there are other things that suggest that Oswald was really knowing that something special was going to happen on the 22nd of November, but not what really happened. So there are intelligence messages about a map being found in Oswald's apartment where he left on the 10th of October. So about the route of the motorcade, which nobody knew at that time, and there was several markings made on it. That map disappeared later because, of course, if it was a as the Warren Commission said, that he had just improvised the shooting of Kennedy, couldn't have planned it ahead, and then he would have had help, and then it was a conspiracy and so forth, so that vanished. But very interesting, you can see Oswald in the doorway. I'll show the photo later, where he's allegedly shooting from the 6th floor. And Chief Curry, who was not a good friend of J. Edgar Hoover after this, said that they had no evidence to put Oswald in the 6th floor. I'll tell you later about it, but all these things were fabricated to fulfill the prophecy of Hoover that Oswald was a lone assassin with no Confederates still at large. So they had to make the evidence, and they did. He was not innocent, Oswald, but he was not guilty of shooting Kennedy. We have, and that's rather important, because we have the Warren Commission telling that Oswald left within 10 minutes of the shooting, left the Texas School Book Depository, and they have routed the way he went. He went to take the bus. That's not normal for a killer, but he took the bus, and then because it was stopped in the traffic jam, he went to take a taxi, and a lady was waiting, and he offered it to her, not normal for a killer either. But she didn't need it, so he went in there, and he went by taxi home. And another Oswald left 10 minutes later, and a police officer, Roger Craig, has testified that he saw Oswald come running down from the Texas School Book Depository and placing himself in a Rambler station car. So there are two different Oswalds at that time too. And what is interesting too is that in the Texas theater where Oswald fled to, allegedly after having shot Tippett, the police officer, one Oswald was, we have information from the police radio that he's hiding in the balcony. But the Oswald we know was arrested in the ground floor. But there was another arrest in the balcony. And the balcony arrest was taken out the back way, and Oswald was taken out the front way. So there were two arrests. We have witnesses describing that. So again, we have two Oswalds. This is all intelligence scenarios, and I'll try to explain later what it could mean. But something is rotten in the state of Denmark, you may say. And Oswald was there was after being arrested, they found out that there was a little aeroplane in the private airfield Redbird nearby with the chief of D2, Fabian Escalante, on board. Obviously, was going to take one of the Oswalds out of the country. That is the theory. And Oswald didn't know what had happened at that time, and when he said you can hide your face when you go into police station, he said, well, I've done nothing to be ashamed of. So, and he tried to phone an intelligence officer in North Carolina during his arrest. So let's go back now to, this is just a background. There's a lot of information, and how do you put this together, because it's contradictory and difficult to understand maybe, but let's just try to understand the tomography of the place. The motorcade came down here, Main Street, Houston Street turned over here, and this way over, and they just went into the sniper's position instead of going straight ahead, which they could have done. And all the security was stripped. The local army unit had been told to stand down. The police officers, the plainclothes police officers, were called in, and they were told not to participate in the security at all. And all this standing down of security all over the place, it could not have happened without the knowledge of Kennedy, and he was actually taking off the bubble top himself. He was interested that it was the security was standing low here, and he. And that may be why Robert Kennedy remarked that Dallas was the ideal place to do it, because everybody was off guard, something else was going to happen. So you have the records building here, you have the Ballistics building over here, with the fire stairs, you have to remember. The Texas School Book Depository, where Oswald allegedly was sitting on this floor up here and shooting down here. And the grassy knoll, very interesting. You should also be aware of James Take standing down all the way down here. So what did the Warren Commission say happened? Well, they said that Kennedy came in here, and when they turned around the corner, Oswald began firing up here 3 shots. The first one missed, which is very extraordinary for a attack, assassination attack. And he didn't shoot at Kennedy, which would be much easier, but he waited until he was hidden by a tree here, and then he fired his first shot. And the second shot, they had to say, hit both men, because Connolly was hit separately, but they said it was the same shot. And the last shot hit Kennedy in the head and blew his head off. That's the official version now. They had to conduct this kind of theory, and it's from the Warren Commission itself, that the bullet had to travel this way, and of course it's nonsense. And now they have tried with laser technology and tell them if he was sitting like this and this, it could have happened. But it fell out pristine on a stretcher in Parkland Hospital, which had nothing to do with it. There has a little bit boy in there. He had cut his arm in glass, and it was bleeding, and it was on that stretcher the bullet was found. It was obviously placed, put there. So for that to happen, and even this imaginative path of a bullet, they had to be sure that there were 3 bullets. And that's what they said they found. But now we got the pristine evidence from the Dallas police, the original. And there were only 2 empty shells and 1 live round in the rifle. We have it in writing, we have photography, and that was just changed because they needed another bullet. And you see here 1 live round and 2 empty. 2 empty and 1 live round. So it's not there weren't 3 empty shells, so everything collapses with that. Just to tell you this simple thing, they didn't find a fingerprint on the rifle all day in Dallas. And then they took over illegally. FBI took over the investigation, and they looked at the rifle for a day and they couldn't find anything. Then they flew the rifle back to Dallas. Oswald had been killed now, took it to the morgue, and now they had a palm print. That's the way that worked. And we have witnesses because Paul Grudy was there, he saw it. So don't believe it, and even the Warren Commission didn't believe what they were signing. Russell was a member of it. We have not been told the truth about Oswald because he was in the FBI. They didn't hear everything. They just wanted their credibility to support the Warren Commission. Hale Boggs was even closer. He also vanished a few years later and was never found. Hoover lied his eyes out to the commission on Oswald and other friends, the bullets, the guns, you name it. He was part of the Warren Commission. And still the Warren Commission claimed that it was unanimous, that they found that, and so forth. And other, even so, more critic about it. So that was really a stunt that they pulled there. But if we look here, I think it's very interesting to see that there are several types of shots that day that are fired. You remember the anatomy, and remember James Take standing down here, and there are the grassy knoll, and they are supposed to be shot only from Oswald's position up here. Now let's see what kind of shots there really were. This is a photo of a shot hitting the pavement. One of the first shots fired didn't hit at all, it hit the pavement. And people saw it. That was the shot that they said Oswald allegedly fired, but if you look at it, his position up here, it doesn't align with it. It was shot from somewhere else, and it had no chance of hitting the motor. It was a terrible shot because the motorcade was out here. How on earth would this be? It was erased. There were 2 police cars on the spot that same afternoon covering. You can see them here. It's from the afternoon. They were covering that place. So that shot was certainly not a real assassination attempt. And another shot, photographed here, you see the shot hitting here, deriving from this records building, had no possibility of reaching anybody in the motorcade. It was a bogus shot. It was a bogus attempt. This represents the bogus attempt, were the first shots. Then came the real shots, those who killed Kennedy, and you have one here hitting the chrome. Kennedy was sitting down here, one from back hitting the chrome, and you have another one going through the front screen. They are not at all mentioned in the Warren Commission. They are not in the Warren Commission, neither were the 2 shots on the pavement. So there's a through and through hole here, and that's interesting because if you go through that, if you see it, oh yeah, just to say that all these things were removed, and they're removing a bullet here, putting it in the pocket, and it doesn't go into the Warren Commission. So if we just see this figure, James Tate stood down there. He told that the assassination commenced, and at the time he suddenly felt something hit him on the cheek. He was cut there. And if you see where he stood there. And there was a bullet mark there. If you take a photograph there, the other way up, you will have this picture. And if you see a bullet going through the front screen here, you'll go up and you'll go exactly to the fire stairs there. Now, if we see on the day of the assassination, you'll see Algens. He was actually taking a picture here. Kennedy is hit for the first time. You can see him in there. Oswald is standing over here. He should be on the 6th floor. But if you look back and see this man on this, he's all alone on the fire stairs of the Ballistics building. And if you zoom in on him and note that there are no reaction from the Secret Service, of JFK's Secret Service, they have been told to stand down, but there is from Johnson's. And Johnson is ducking here. You can't see him. He ducked when he went into the plaza. We'll come back to that. So if we zoom in on this guy on the fire escape, you will see a person. I don't know if you can see in this light. Can we dim the light? It's not possible. Excellent. Maybe a little more. Well, you can see his knee out here, and you can see he has a jacket laid over something sticking out here, and his head behind it. And he's sitting all along there, and he is just in a position to have fired. Those 3 shots are responsible for the hit in JFK's back on the level of the 3rd thoracic vertebra, the hit on the chrome list, and the hit through the windscreen. He is one of the shooters, in my opinion. And who is he? Well, when we turn in here on Dealey Plaza, Oswald allegedly sitting up here. He's sitting on the fire there. You can just see him there. We'll have another picture of him. He's sitting up here. He's all alone, sitting there. This is a guy. And when Kennedy turns around the corner, you can see him here. He's turned himself, and he's sitting in this shooting position. I think we could see he's turned, and you can see he's leaning over here. And he's probably one of the shooters, never been described before. And then Kennedy comes down to this place, and this is where the limousine slows down almost to a halt. And there he is hit in the head. And of course, there's a lot of discussion. You see his head being thrown violently backwards. Jackie Kennedy climbs onto the trunk to retrieve some of his brain material and bones. Instinctively. So of course he was shot from the front, but they have been denying that for 53 years now. But if you believe that, we will have to look for some shooters up there, and we'll have a look at it, what really happened. Dave Powers is a very close aide of Kennedy. Dave Powers and Kenneth O'Donnell were sitting in the motorcade in the car just behind. And we know this from a conversation they had in '67 with the chairman of the House of Representatives, Tip O'Neill. And they told Tip O'Neill, Tip, you can say what you want, but we are convinced that at least 2 shots came from the front. And Tip O'Neill, he said, why didn't you say that to the FBI? Well, they told us we were mistaken. It might have been echoes. And you understand, the family, it means the Kennedy family, wanted this behind them. So again, they changed their testimony, and no shots from the front. So the Warren Commission's version was surviving. This is Malcolm Kilduff, who was the press secretary for Kennedy. At 1 o'clock that day, with tears in his eyes, he comes out to the press and says, the President of the United States is dead. It was a simple matter of a shot right through the head. He's just come out for the emergency room and was told what happened. And this is obviously also a shot from the front. Now, what really happened, we can try to see in some of the photos. Kennedy is sitting here. You can just see he's just here. Try to see there's a man with an umbrella in the sunshine and a man who's raising his fist. They have a distance between them. At this particular moment, he's shot in the throat, Kennedy. So it has to come from somewhere up here. We have a person standing at this concrete wall here, Gordon Arnold. We know him because he's a soldier who volunteered. His testimony later. But if we and you have Zapruder taking the film up here. So this is how it all looks. You will see out here are two people blocking the access, and in front of them is a man called Emmett Hudson, who is the groundkeeper of the parking lot up there. So they're blocking this, and they're having an open view here. So we see what just, if we take this picture, which is taken just a little before by Betzner, and you'll see the same area, but it's more steady, it can be more clear. And if you blow it up, you'll have this. This is the original. You have Gordon Arnold behind the cement wall. A little further back, you have the picket fence. And if you can just imagine this shadow. The sun is projecting his shadow onto the picket fence, which is lamellae, so it's see-through. And I'll just show you this way. You can see the shadow this way. I have enhanced it, but if you see the real photo, you can see it here. And it's a person standing this way, so it's a left-handed shooter. Left-handed shooter, and that is very important because we have a witness behind the picket fence, Ed Hoffman, who saw a left-handed shooter there, and he's responsible for one bullet in the president's neck. It was not a frangible bullet; it was a normal rifle bullet. And Gordon Arnold, standing here, he witnessed when he took the film of the president. He suddenly heard a bullet whiz over his left shoulder. So it is obviously, and this shadow is not on any other picture. So. Later, and obviously it is the first shooter on the grassy knoll. And you see Kennedy react to it. He's shot in the throat. He does like this. He's driving into this kill zone between the umbrella man who's pumping up an umbrella in the sunshine and a man with a fist and signaling probably to the shooters up there who to hit. And try to see over here is a very interesting figure too, which is a smoking gun self. We come back to it. He was in an apron. Kennedy goes a little further forward. You see Emmett Hudson is genuinely surprised. They don't really care, seems to be. This one is running up backwards to Gordon Arnold lying up here. And Mary Moorman is standing here. She's taking a very famous picture now, the Polaroid photo of Kennedy. And just to show you in the Zapruder film, Kennedy is not hit in the head yet. He's hit in the neck. His driver is continuously treading on the brake. You can see it because the braking lights are on all the way, all 9 seconds, until the limousine is almost stopped. And at this time, he's hit in the right temple. Mary Moorman takes her Polaroid photo now, which shows this. Zapruder standing up there. Emmett Hudson here, and those two blocking the access. If you see up here, just there, I don't know if the light permits it, but I have enhanced that shadow too. You can see it closer there, and you just see, but you can see, even though you may not see the shadow of his body, the silhouette projected against the backside of the picket fence, you can see over the fence, it's a right-handed shooter. He's shooting 3 times. One hits Kennedy, and it is expansive bullets, dum-dum bullets, explosive missiles. When it hits, it is disintegrated to make as much damage as possible, and it will go through Kennedy's head and take the back part of it off. 2 of them misses and hits the grass on the other side. We know that from a witness who asked an officer afterwards, are those ground moles? And he says, no, they're bullets shot from over there. And that's exactly what that kind of bullet would make a mark. So I enhanced it here. You can see, this is the true picture, and you can see his head is over there. So this is the second gunman on the grassy knoll. There were actually 2 second gunmen, one responsible for the rifle shot and one responsible for the headshot. Now, we go back to this guy. He is very interesting. It's never been described before, other than maybe he was a local butcher on the lunch hour free. But he is actually at this place. It's from the Zapruder film, pointing towards Kennedy and looking at the fire stairs shooter up there to indicate who to hit. That's my obvious conclusion of that. But who is he? A little later, Kennedy has not reached the triple underpass yet. He's dead down there. We see a lot of things going on. Everybody is aroused and shocked by the deed, except this guy. This is the man in the apron whom they're telling is a butcher. He may be a butcher. He's not that kind of butcher you'll find around the store. He's more malignant than that. And over here is the man with the fist and the umbrella man sitting down, close together. And although they later, they never been identified properly, and this guy neither. But he has a very peculiar way of conducting himself. But who could he be? If you blow him up, you can see a particular way of walking, and his head is bald. And we have from E. Howard Hunt, the Watergate burglar, another Watergate burglar, his death testimony. He names some who were in the big event, as they called it, and one of them was William King Harvey. He was a high-ranking CIA officer. He was a connecting officer liaison officer between the CIA and the mafia. And he was one of 3 people knowing about the false defectors to Russia, so he would know Oswald, who was a false defector when he went over there. And he looks like this in his face. So it could very well be him, and he was really an enemy of the Kennedys. They had exiled him after the missile crisis and sent him to Rome. He allegedly should be in Sardinia at this time, but obviously he's not, and he is actually in a bulletproof vest. And how do we know that? Well, if we go, this is him. If we go and see some pictures later, 5-10 minutes later, we'll see him here. He has a peculiar way of walking, and you see he's without his apron now. He has taken off his bulletproof apron. He has just been talking to this man who is the umbrella man, and saying that mission is completed probably. This is the guy. So to sum up, what happened there in Dealey Plaza of the bullets? I tried to put them in this card. You can see Houston Street and Elm Street this way. This is the school book depository, and this is where the motorcade came. There were a lot of bullets, as you saw, because you saw all the markings. The first bullets were the bogus attempt, just provocation, just bullets shot 10 meters beside the car, just as a provocation. You have one going here in the pavement, one hitting the Stamford's freeway sign, which was removed, so we can't have any pictures of it, and one over here. They had no chance of hitting. And then there are those chance of hitting. There are those from the fire stairs man hitting Kennedy in the back through the screen of the automobile, and the chrome list hit. And then there's a separate shot shooting Connolly. Connolly always said he had been the prime target, and he was hit separately, and he believed that to his death. And he had corroboration from Zapruder and from Marina Oswald too. If Lee had wanted to shoot somebody, it would have been Connolly. And then we have the lethal shots from the front, one to President Kennedy's front of the neck, and one to his temple, and 2 went into the grass there. Kennedy is down here just to confirm there was puffs of smoke. A lot of witnesses described puffs of smoke and smell of smoke from the grassy knoll, and officially there was no shots there. So of course you have another evidence of that being correct. These 2 people in part of the conspiracy was the umbrella man and this man, the fist man, they call him because he raised his fist when Kennedy was driving by. And they're sitting just minutes beside each other. And this one is talking in a radio, and on other pictures you can see he has a big walkie-talkie sticking out of his pocket. It was not normal in '63 to have a walkie-talkie, and he's obviously in contact with somebody. This guy with the umbrella was found in '77, if it's the same man, and he appeared from a commission in '77 and said that he was protesting against Kennedy by pumping up this umbrella because his father had been an ambassador in London and they used umbrellas there. I think it's a little, but there was no, and he didn't know this guy. He never heard about him. I mean, so obviously that's a lie too.
What is your take on what's going on in the rest of the picture? Who's the plan?
This? Yeah. Well, I think this. I don't know all the names. One of them is Zapruder, and these other photographs is. I don't know. The Newmans are here with his 2 children. He testimonied just after the assassination that He heard shots coming from behind, it means from the grassy knoll, and hit Kennedy in the right temple. So we have a lot of witnesses telling the true story there. And this is the man talking in the phone. Now we go to Oswald. This is Oswald, or Oswalds, because there are several of them. I could tell you they're different, many of them. This and this guy may be the same, and this guy may be the same, but they are not together, they are not the same. And as I explained before, there were a lot of mistakes Oswald made. When he applied for his re-entry to the States and his passport, he claimed that his birthplace was in Louisiana, Texas. And he made a lot of mistakes, and also in the language he was much better at Russian than in English. Made a lot of grammatic errors and so forth. And then came the whole thing of his appearance. He didn't have this scarring behind his right ear after a mastectomy, the real Oswald and so forth. So this guy coming back was actually a Russian lookalike, but he was only a lookalike. He was not the real thing. Jack White has made this comparison, to put those two pictures together to online, and you can see they are obviously not the same. And this is from my book. You see his hazel eyes when he went to Russia, and when he came back, you can hardly see they're gray. It says there, but it was because they were investigated gray there too. So he had gray eyes when he came back, and it just doesn't happen. Now, Johnson pressed for an immediate inauguration, and he didn't want to do it without Jackie Kennedy by his side. And he later said that it was because Bobby Kennedy told him it's very important. He did it very quickly, and Bobby Kennedy never heard of it. So that's a conspiracy kind of argument, and you can see Johnson blinking to his good friend. Everything is in order now. They have the power, and before Bobby Kennedy, who has some power left, is aware of what has really gone on, everything is out of his hands, and the new government is in place. Just to mention, we're going to the end soon, Jack Ruby in front of the school book depository, which the Warren Commission claimed never happened. So altogether, if you put this together, there's a lot of information. They say the JFK assassination consists of 5 or 50 million pieces of evidence. You have to find those 10,000 putting the puzzle right together, and that's why it makes it difficult. So there were three scenarios actually taking place on top of each other. The first scenario was that Castro wanted some sympathy for the fact that the Kennedys were trying to assassinate him, and they were, we know that for certain. So he constructed this provocation in Dallas, where his loyal agent Oswald would take the political responsibility of some shots being fired at the Kennedy motorcade, which was just a provocation, nobody harmed, and that would justify that they could initiate peace talks afterwards, because then if it was obvious to the world that Kennedy was trying to assassinate him, that would give him some kind of sympathy. But the Kennedy loyal CIA or agencies knew about this, so they modified it. And what the Kennedy really needed at that time was something to legitimize the invasion of Cuba. So they had to spice it up, and the mafia, as we heard Jack Ruby and Oswald discussing killing Connolly, who was sitting just in front of. If that happened, they would have the legitimacy to invade Cuba the week after. You have to remember that there was three scenarios actually, or three attempts actually. There was one in Chicago 3 weeks before, and there was one in with a similar build-up with somebody with close connection to Cuba, and one in Tampa, Gilberto he was called, in Tampa, where security was down, but they were canceled. Something missed at that part, and now you come to Dallas and everything fits in. And if Kennedy had pulled this off, their scenario, he would have been able to invade Cuba. And they were actually at the point of invading Cuba, because in the hours after the assassination, jets were hurling off from Cardell Air Force Base into Cuban airspace. And the new president, Johnson, pulled them back. So there was a lot of things going on there, trying to eliminate Castro. In the hours that Kennedy went through Dallas, they had their man, Desmond Fitzgerald, tell a Cuban high-profile agent Rolando Cubela in Paris to kill Castro with a fountain pen with some lethal stuff in it and a hypodermic needle. So they were planning for a coup, and as we know, Robert Kennedy tried to push for an invasion 14 days after this assassination, but Johnson wouldn't go behind it. On top of that, on top of the Kennedy plan, the rogue element of the CIA and the politician who wanted to get rid of Kennedy saw the golden opportunity to actually superimpose a real assassination on this bogus plan. And at that time, they caught Bobby Kennedy on the wrong foot, and he was paralyzed. What was he going? He couldn't tell anybody what had really happened, so he just wanted to close it down. So actually, this whole assassination have had no voice, because nobody wanted to know the truth. The Kennedys didn't want it, and the conspirators certainly didn't want it. But we have some clues of how they looked at it. Of Bobby Kennedy, especially, he said, if the public knew what had gone on, the streets will flow with blood. So there's no doubt in my mind that that was really what was happening here, is that these three scenarios was put on top of each other. And if you see the bullfighter verse, which is another clue, it was in the CIA memos for Kennedy that morning, writing, bullfight critics ranked in rows crowd the enormous plaza full, but only one is there who knows, and he's the man who fights the bull. And it tells to me that Kennedy himself took upon him to lead this false flag operation to legalize the invasion of Cuba one week later. And they were already preparing for it. Some jets were on the way to Cuba. They had already prepared maybe Che Guevara, who was arrested there, that he was part of a coup, and they were planning for Rolando in Paris to go to Castro and kill him. And maybe even in one of the scenarios, or in the scenario where they were changing identity again with Oswald and sending the American loyal agent with Fabian Escalante from the little private airport, they would have an agent close to Castro who could also eliminate him. So they were really going for it, the Kennedys, I'm sure of that. And of course it was playing dirty, but what you cannot take from the Kennedys is their very fine vision of how the world was supposed to be after that. We can thank the Kennedys that we didn't get World War III in '62, because they were the only ones at the cabinet meeting who didn't want to push the button. He put his foot down instead and said, we don't push the button. If you remember it, Castro had all these, and they didn't know if they were operational, and his generals said, Curtis LeMay in particular, just press the button, there would be no retaliation and so forth. And Kennedy, he didn't want to do that. If they had pressed the button at that time, and we know that from McNamara, who participated, we would have had World War III, because they were operational. And Castro would have pushed the button because he was losing himself, as he said. And then it would have spread to Berlin, and then we would have had World War III. But Kennedy was the wiser at that time, and we owe to them that we avoided World War III. So if you want to know more about it, I have a home page, JFK High Noon in Dallas. You can have the overview, and there are links, and there is a download of the interactive iBook, which has we had a lot of videos with actually the pristine evidence of people saying the things that I've told you. So that was just, well, I mentioned that RFK said that if people knew the truth, blood would flow in the streets. And I think that RFK feared for the Kennedy dynasty if they knew the truth about what the Kennedys were up to. And but with the 100th anniversary of JFK coming up next year, I think his legacy deserves the truth, and primarily maybe we do deserve the truth. And I would like to finish with one quotation from Dante, which Kennedy liked a lot. He said that the hottest places in hell are reserved for those who maintain their neutrality at times of moral crisis. So you may do things that are bad, but the worst sin of all is to do nothing. So with those words, I thank you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. It's yeah, I don't know if funny is the right word, but it's there's a lot of theories about this murder, huh? And this is also very well documented, so it's exciting what the truth is in the end. I'm sure there is a lot of questions. We don't have a lot of time, but it's up to you. If you want a smaller dinner time, then we have a lot of possibilities for a question. Any questions?
I just want to ask, were you saying that John Kennedy actually arranged this himself along with his brother, that some incident would happen that they could go to war in Cuba? So that's what I heard. You were saying John F. Kennedy arranged all this scenario to start a war in Cuba.
Yeah. I'm telling you that they were taking this provocation from Castro as a God-given present to enhance it and to make it a false flag operation to legitimize the invasion of Cuba. He had to deal with the Cuban problem before the '64 election, because Nixon knew a lot about this, and he would tell that there were still some missiles left there, and Kennedy would be out of office. Yeah, I'm quite sure of that, and that's why I told you that RFK. 1 year before, in '62, he wasn't foreign to the idea, the whole idea of this false flag operation, as they call it. He'll say it'll be the Maine all over again, and the Maine was a ship that was shut down during the Civil War by its own people. Yeah, that's the way it works. The Tonkin Bay incident was the incident that started the Vietnam War, and it was false. It was the CIA who shut it down themselves. So that's the way it works, I think.
Wait. God is speaking.
Can you go back, please, to the picture that I was asking before? Because I want to show you something.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you see the film camera on the grass? The guy is filming the couple there with the baby on the grass.
I can see the film camera here.
Yeah. Where is at this moment the car with JFK?
It's gone.
No.
The JFK.
Look at the motorcycle. Where's the car?
The car. There's no car here.
No, the car is about where you are. The car is still coming.
No. Because when it's coming, there was a lot of people around here. This is after the.
No, we'll talk later. You look at your own pictures again. The car is still coming. And there is a film camera.
They are lying down there because the shots already fell. They're lying down because the shots are already done.
No, I'm sorry to say.
They are all. They are running because it's all happened. The car is gone. It's on its way to Parkland Hospital.
I'm sorry.
Yes, I'm sure, because I know. I think he's called Towner. But I got the name of this guy who's taking the press photo from this press car.
I'm sorry, you're mistaken.
Yeah. Well, it's okay.
And anybody else?
Yes, I think an event is false until it's proven real. And if you take a look at all the pictures, you can see some eventualities with the shadows and so on. And the Zapruder film, it was actually released first 12 years after the event. So how can you take it as a proof that the event happened as they tell us? Because the event is only what they tell us happened, and we don't know if it's true at all.
You're saying, I think, to rephrase it, can we be sure that the Zapruder film is actually portraying what happened? Yeah. Well, the pictures have been there for all the time, yes, but you know nothing, really, you can be sure of nothing. But we know that the Zapruder film has been manipulated in some of the frames have been cut out, and Time Life magazine, who had it for the first 15 years, said that a student had worked on the film and made a little error, and then it was clipped together. Within the first 15 years, all the American public saw of this film was still frames, and they also put it in the wrong order. We have Hoover's word for that in the Warren Commission book. So his head was thrown forward, and they had reversed 2 of the pictures, and he admitted that later. So some of the Zapruder film is all right because they hadn't the technology in '63 to manipulate too much, but something is manipulated. They say that. For example, Miss Moorman said, and I stepped into the road and I told Mr. Kennedy, look this way and so forth. But on the Zapruder film, she's still standing on the grass. There are some things like that they take up. And if you take the Zapruder film and compare it with the Nix film, which was taken from another direction, in the Nix film, this Clint Hill agent, he reaches the car, he goes up and he touches Jackie Kennedy and puts her into the... That doesn't happen in the Zapruder film. So I agree with you, cannot believe everything you see, but the main thing that Kennedy's head is thrown back and that she climbs onto the trunk and retrieves something definitely confirms our suspicion, which everybody else says, the witnesses there and the Parkland Hospital doctors, that Kennedy was shot from the front and his back of his head blew off. So to that extent, I think we can believe the Zapruder film.
Hi. You mentioned that a few characters in this story thought Connolly may have been the main target of the assassination.
Senator Connolly.
Yeah. Can you just recap on what the motive would have been for Connolly to have been taken out?
Yeah, I can tell you that. From the mafia point of view, he was bad for business because he wouldn't allow drug dealing. That's what I have read, and that was why the mafia and Jack Ruby wanted him out of the way. For the Kennedys, to condone that would be very easy because Connolly was the source telling that Kennedy had a serious medical problem, that he was dependent on medication, and we saw what Hillary Clinton is up against these days because she was a little weak, and Kennedy was very ill. He was living a very dangerous life because he had to have medication every day. It was absolutely true. But Connolly had spread that rumor in '60 and threatened the presidency for Kennedy, and probably would do it again. And that would be one major reason for it. So they were not getting along all that well. And Connolly was another competition if Bobby was going into politics too, if you have to see it that way, because Johnson was out. He was going to be indicted, as I told you. He was going to prison. And the next in line would be Connolly. So if somebody wants to be... I don't say the Kennedys planned that, but they may have condoned it happening, which is a sin of omission, and it was a dirty trick. It certainly was. But they were up against crooks, weren't they? Yeah.
I have a question. You say that the Kennedys themselves were in on it. And I just wonder if they were in on it, do you think that they replaced him with a double and then
with the Oswald thing?
Yeah, John F. Kennedy. Or was he really shot?
I think they knew about it. I think Robert Kennedy knew about this double Oswald coming back. Was that a question?
No, I mean if John F. Kennedy himself knew about this murder to come and that he was replaced on the day with a double or something like that. Or do you think
no. I don't think. I think Kennedy he didn't want to go to Dallas. He had some expressions to an advance man close to him. They said, "I don't like this thing going to Dallas and so forth." But he had to do it, and it was a success. But on the day of the assassination, I'm sure he knew that something was going to happen. How could he predict the gun and the shooting? And it was an ideal situation to kill your president last night, the assassination. The talk was about assassination, and Kennedy had this thing about death. I don't know if it was a death wish, but he was so thrilled with this thing about assassination. You know, when he had just had his success after the missile crisis in '62, he said to Bobby, "Tonight is the night to go to the theater," meaning what happened to Lincoln. And Bobby says, "If you go, I want to go with you." So they sort of had this Greek philosophy that if you had to go, you had to do it on top of your success. So they want. I think Kennedy was very into this whole thing about death and life. He had had the last oil 4 times in his life because he was very ill, and one of his favorite poems was "I Have a Rendezvous with Death." It meant so much to him that his little daughter of 5, Caroline Kennedy, came in and recited it verbatim in a cabinet meeting, and everybody was stunned and saw the connection between father and daughter in that respect. So he had a high profile of courage, I think. It's just like it was said yesterday by Kierkegaard, if you dare something, you may lose your footing for a while, but if you don't dare anything, you'll lose your life. And I think that was the essence of Kennedy's view on life. It was just every day at a time. And he wanted to do some. I think he had a fantastic view on life. And one of them was that he would actually dare to do this himself. And he knew it was dangerous. He must have known. And that's why the bullfighter verse means something in this context. Only one knows he's the one who wants to fight the bull. Yeah.
I also have a question.
Yeah.
Kennedy also were up against the Federal Reserve and issued some money. So you could say you have the mafia as an enemy, you had the CIA as an enemy, and you also got the banksters as an enemy. And now you're stating he really had a death wish in a way because of maybe his medical conditions.
I think he was anticipating that life was not forever, especially not for him because he was ill. But he still had, as you just pointed out, he had the guts to stand up. Well, he had enemies everywhere except the American people. But they actually didn't count in this matter. And I think that the federal thing is a very important thing. I think he went as far as to issuing the first money and succeeded in doing that, but it was redrawn later and finished off that idea. So, yes, he had a lot of enemies.
No doubt. Any more questions? Yeah.
Hello, I'm just wondering, you said the Newmans are lying there on the grass, facing the direction from which the bullets came.
There?
Do they have a child with them?
There are two children, the Newmans.
I'm just wondering why, presumably if they were facing this way watching the motor car, and they hear bullets, I think my instinct would be to dive this way on top of the children, and I wouldn't be brave enough to turn around and
I think they were standing on the pavement.
Mm-hmm.
They were standing, and that's some time ago. They were standing on the pavement, and the car went over here. The shots came from over here, and he told in his immediate interview afterwards that they heard shots coming from behind. The first shot came there, and the second shot too. And then he said to his wife, "That's it, get down." And then they threw themselves down on the grass. I think, for obvious reasons, because it's soft on the grass. I don't, it's a reflection, I think. You think something's contradictory to that because they're lying in that direction?
Yeah, I just think fighting for the bullets. If I hear a bullet, I'm terrified.
What? Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wonder why they didn't pull down.
Well, there are other pictures of them. Cancellara has also taken, I think it's one of them. Cancellara is one of them. And he took, and they're lying in the same direction, yes. So.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Last year I read a book, and it mentioned something about Woody Harrelson's father, Charles Harrelson.
Yeah.
He was a hitman for the mafia.
One of the three tramps.
Right.
Yeah.
And he was caught some years later shooting a federal judge, assassinating him.
Exactly. Yes.
And when he was caught,
he was in some kind of cocaine.
Right, something like that. Yeah. Because a federal judge, this judge was going after the mafia, and so the mafia took out the judge. Yes. Right, and it was the first time in 100 years that a federal judge had been assassinated in the U.S.
Okay.
And so when Charles Harrelson was caught, he immediately, he confessed that he had something to do in the Kennedy assassination, and then soon afterwards there was a retraction by his lawyers of that statement, and then he died in prison. Woody Harrelson's father.
I heard about him, and he was confronted because there are these photos I have here of this three tramps being hauled out of some of the train wagons from behind. They were three tramps, it was said, but they had new shoe leather and so forth. And one of them looked amazingly like Harrelson, and he was confronted with that in prison. And well, you could see he was trying to disguise it. And then he said, "You know, if anybody ever would admit to this, they would be killed." So it was kind of an admission, but I don't know if it was any of the shooters. But you know the death testimony of E. Howard Hunt. We haven't had time to discuss it, but he told that it was called the big event, and he was a bench warmer. So there was something going on, the big event, but whether it was the Kennedy part of the assassination or the real malignant part of the assassination, I don't know, and I don't think Howard knows.
You mentioned E. Howard Hunt.
Yeah.
There was this interview last year on the Dark Journalist on the internet, and it was with Caddy, his E. Howard Hunt's lawyer.
No.
His lawyer named Caddy. I forgot his full name. And there was some revelation there that E. Howard Hunt gave him just soon before he died.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, and
but even during the Watergate scandal, you hear Richard Nixon talk to his guy Haldeman, I think it is, and say Haldeman tells him that in the Watergate burglary there was this guy Hunt, and Nixon says, "Stop, this guy knows too damn much. Just give him the $1 million. He wanted $1 million for something, and or the whole Bay of Pigs thing may explode." Nixon says. And then Haldeman said, "What the hell does Cuba has to do with this? Just tell Ehrlichman he knows what I mean." And they get the $1 million. And when Haldeman goes to prison, he writes the whole Bay of Pigs thing in Richard Nixon's mouth was the Kennedy assassination. So obviously Kennedy, you heard he was present at that meeting before at Murchison, and he gave 3 different variations over when he heard about the JFK assassination for the first time. He was not all clean in that respect, I'm sure. He had premonition of it.
Okay,
Yeah.
I think we have satisfied the audience. So again, I want to thank you very much for
Thank
the
you.
lecture.
Thank you.
And now it's time to have something to eat, and we will be back on schedule. So 3:30.